Okay, so hey there, we are joined again by Karen Bakey, who is a clinical psychologist that operates out of Sydney. And, Sam and I are really excited that you're joining us again, sort of in part two of talking about, my body actually predicting a diagnosis before the doctors did, and actually looking at some of the kind of science behind, like, how is that possible and not just completely woo-woo. So, yeah, excited to have you back.
Yeah, Thank you. It's great to be here.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So I think what we were sort of finishing off with last time was talking about a kind of quite a deep somatic process that I personally had related to a treatment injury that I had after a surgery. And what we really saw was that, I had this foot surgery and I had this nerve pain that nobody could explain. And then in this session or series of sessions, my body actually explained what was going on long before the MRI, the nerve conduction study, and the doctors actually knew what was going on. And the body also gave me a treatment with the VIX, which was really bizarre, which turned out to later be validated that it stimulates nerve repair mechanisms, through the TRPM8 receptor. Didn't know that, but my body sort of decided that was a good idea. But all of this was ultimately the message that when your body is in danger and it detects a threat, it flips into the survival mode and healing stops. And this idea and concept it's called the cell danger response. And the cell danger response is this concept that was sort of coined by Dr. Robert Naviaux in his research and his work. Let's talk a little bit about what actually happened in that therapy session from a science perspective. So what is the cell danger response?
Well, my understanding, and, it's fairly limited, but my understanding is that what Dr. Naviaux is saying is that our bodies are actually, there is a natural process that moves towards healing. It's used fairly broadly in terms of it can be, an actual cut into the body, or it can be a toxin that comes in from the environment, or it can be a psychological threat, which is where we get interested, I guess. That then I think what seems to happen is we go into this process, which he calls the cell danger response, and we go through these phases and we naturally move through those phases. And if we can naturally move, if the cells in our body can actually naturally move through those phases and complete those phases, then they come back to healing. And that's kind of how things are supposed to happen. But then sometimes it gets stuck.
Yeah. And it's interesting with this, the cell is actually quite cleverly interpreting a danger response. It's actually sensing at a cellular level that there is danger, and it releases ATP, adenosine triphosphate, in the process, and it stiffens the outside of the cell, which is really fascinating, increasing this inflammation. And there's something quite unique about this from a kind of, it's sort of tied into metabolomics, Sam, which is something you know a little bit more about. But what is it that's kind of going on with the mitochondria downshifting from this energy production to this protective state?
Yeah, so the mitochondria, just out of interest, is actually passed on by your mother. So that's the genetic pathway so it's X chromosome. So yeah, the mitochondria, which is held in the cytoplasm, is responsible for producing, it's the energy house of the cell, which produces ATP, which is like our coins, our energy system. And that in itself requires quite a lot of nutrients, which, things like B3, B6, magnesium, coenzyme 10, it's highly dependent on methylation pathways, which are your B vitamins. So that has its own kind of needs as well. But what it does, it's just got this innate intelligence where it picks up on certain molecules, which is the study of metabolomics, where it's the study of small little molecules in response to some kind of assault. And that assault can be a trauma, a chemical, biology, and it can also be psychological. So there's this real connection between trauma, depression, PTSD, OCD, in connection with this metabolomic cell danger response. So what happens is that, for example, from a psychological perspective, when you have high cortisol, you're in this sympathetic dominant state. Your body produces stress hormones, cortisol, adrenaline, noradrenaline. And what happens during that state is that cortisol can long-term stress, not in acute stress, but long-term stress, can cause kind of aberrant blood glucose levels. And those blood glucose levels then initiate another chemical response, without getting too complicated, called AGEs, and they're called advanced glycation pathways, end pathways. And that then interrupts how neurotransmitters are, alterations in neurotransmitters. There's a genetic component. It happens normally, but depending on genetic disposition, it can increase pro-inflammatory pathways like C-reactive protein, leukotrienes, which interleukin-6 predominantly is a pro-inflammatory pathway. And so what can happen is that you get this pro-inflammatory state as well, as long as you're in this emotionally stressed response. So these pathways then can interfere with gut function. Like, it's just this cascade event is phenomenal. And so we're starting to see the study of metabolomics in correlation with things like chronic fatigue syndrome, autoimmunity, cancer. Now, back in the 80s, this amazing Dr. Candace Pert, who was a neuroscientist, happened to marry an immunologist called Michael Ruff. And they had come up with the term. So Candace initially had hypothesized that for every neurotransmitter that was produced in the brain, there was a receptor on immune cells. So she had hypothesized that there's these neuropeptides attached to immune cells. And they were the founders of psychoneuroimmunology. And so this means studying the connection between the brain and the immune system. And so there's 3 distinct phases, right, Karen? It's beautifully choreographed in this cell danger response. So can you tell us a little bit more about that and disorders of being stuck in that type of response?
So, and the interaction between the physiology and the psychology is so fascinating, right? And so I think what Dr. Navio outlined in the cell danger response is that there are 3 phases that the cell goes through. So as you mentioned, Adele, ATP, which is normally the energy messenger of the cell, when there's a threat, ATP actually comes outside the cell and it becomes called extracellular ATP, and it becomes a signaling molecule rather than an energy molecule. And it signals to the body that there's stress, and it signals to go into this cell danger response. And the first phase is the inflammation phase. So the mitochondria change shape, they change function, and so inflammation is the first step and we know that we get a cut and, it gets red, it gets inflamed, all that kind of stuff. That's that initial inflammatory response that's happening. And then after that starts to settle, then there's a shift towards proliferation. So tissue regeneration, stem cell repair and activation, and the inflammation begins to resolve. And then the third stage he calls differentiation. So where the cells are preparing for re-entry into the healthy cooperative state, you get remyelination and synaptic repair. And when that is complete, then we should move back into the state of health and healing. And we're done, we're recovered. But what we find is that what he's saying is that we get stuck. Those cells get stuck, and they get stuck because they're still in a state of danger. And so we get different sorts of disorders depending on where they're stuck, right? And so I think what we're interested in, what seems to me from a psychological point of view, it's often the final stage, the differentiation stage, that we get stuckness. We get PTSD, OCD, we get chronic fatigue is a classic, anxiety disorders, but also more physical things, which I see a lot of in my practice, people who've got mold illness or who've got Lyme's disease, and pots and pans and PANDAS, all sorts of things that have created this system which is in a constant state of threat. And just doesn't want to heal. And those are chronic illnesses that take a long, long time to get better. And now we've got a better sense of understanding why that's happening, is that the cells are still in the state of danger and are not able to exit into the healing cycle.
Yeah. And what's interesting is the progression of disease. Usually, you study a disease in the space of acute, or you study it in the space of chronic. And what's interesting about the acute phase is that initial kind of CD1, CD2, the cell danger 1, cell danger 2 phases, where it's like, okay, it's acute, we should treat it, we should do whatever. And then it's kind of, they just walk away. And then it kind of, we've sorted out the acute phase. Now we leave it. And it's actually, and from a medicine perspective, the chronic management of disease is a very mix and match kind of feeling of how well it's been treated globally.
Yeah.
Some diseases, there's so much research thrown at it. So the chronic phase is well funded, well managed, everything's good. But for example, diabetes, not managed well at all. And there's still lots of gaps.
And chronic fatigue.
Fatigue and lupus. And, there's certain diseases where the continued kind of march of cell danger response to that kind of differentiation phase continues because it's not actually, the body isn't feeling safe earlier on. And what's intriguing is it's the word feeling safe. Right? So safe is no longer just an emotional feeling. It's a state that they've now actually measured. They've actually measured scientifically the state of a cell being in a safe state. And it's very interesting when you start to look at what actually causes that state for us as human beings. And that starts to then intertwine how important therapeutic interventions can be for medical conditions as well.
Yes.
Yeah. And that's it's a mental state of feeling safe, but also to acknowledge the body in this. The body has to feel safe, right? And how often do we notice that we might be a little bit tense ourselves? Like we hold our tension and our organization of safety in our body. Okay. So we, this leads quite nicely into your experience as well. But I think just before we step into that, looking at this polyvagal theory and what happens for the system in this, it's almost like a traffic light system, isn't it? Like green, orange, red. And I know that's something that you look at, Karen, but go ahead, Adele, tell us more about this polyvagal.
Well, it's something that I'm very passionate about. And I know, Karen, you're also very passionate about polyvagal. It's developed, by, there's several sort of experts that have contributed to the sort of base of literature out there. Deb Dana, Stephen Porges, like there are a lot of people that write about this stuff. So 3 stages, traffic light system. We covered it quite in depth in our PTSD episode, but we were talking about the autonomic nervous system is in 2 parts. You have the sympathetic and you've got the parasympathetic, and the parasympathetic is also divided into 2. So the idea is that, when we're actually in a good space, we're in the green zone in a way, we're in what's called the ventral vagal side of the parasympathetic nervous system. So we're open, we're curious, we are able to engage, we are feeling safe, right? Connected to ourselves, able to connect to others. There isn't a perception of danger in that space. So ventral vagal is when you measure people and their health, if they spend a lot of time in ventral vagal, they're doing well from a health and well-being perspective. Then you have triggers. You have things that kind of move you into a sympathetic nervous state. So the sympathetic nervous system, this governs, this is driven by the HPA axis, the release of adrenaline, noradrenaline, and the drive up of cortisol, which is our stress hormone. And this sympathetic state, it is designed to get us into action to fight, flee, or fix. And it's an active way. So here we're getting to safety by being active, right? We need to move, we need to run, we need to get away, we need to fix something, we need to do. And then when you're in that state for a prolonged period of time and you start to have quite a lot of like fatigue from that, you're constantly in this state of sympathetic and you don't regenerate yourself properly and you are not regulating yourself well to get back to ventral vagal, you eventually, your nervous system will have you collapse into the dorsal vagal side of the parasympathetic nervous system. And the collapse phase is now full. You can dissociate, you have to disconnect, you just can't be with people. This is where we see the freeze and fawn response. This is where, we see from a kind of danger perspective, the body actually just kind of disconnects us completely to keep us safe. So the 3 phases, what I'm kind of curious about, and Cara, maybe you can, talk a little bit to this, is the connection between the cell danger response overlapping the polyvagal. Like how do they kind of overlay and interlap with each other? That's a word.
Yeah. Well, yes, we're trying to, as you say, when we're in a state of danger, then there's those options. We're either in sympathetic or we're into dorsal vagal, and dorsal vagal in a high tone state is what happens. But if we can get into safety, then actually being in a sympathetic state is the state where we can be playful, where we can have energy but be safe, as opposed to have energy but be in danger. And then when we're actually in a safe state, then the dorsal vagal, we go into low tone dorsal, which is the state of deep rest and repair. And so when we take Stephen Porges's polyvagal together with Dr. Navio's cell danger, it shows that how important it is for our bodies to get out of those threat states of sympathetic arousal or dorsal vagal high tone and get into safety where there can be energy. Safety doesn't have to be, still and calm and not do anything. The sympathetic can then be the energy that's productive, that's playful, that's, action. And then importantly, the dorsal vagal low tone becomes very, very crucial. If we can get into that really safe state where there's rest, that's where repair can happen. And so the connection I would make to that is that that's when our cell danger response is going to be able to complete and move back into healing. So we have to have that capacity to get into safety in order for that to happen.
It's pretty amazing. So I suppose, looking at these kind of theories, looking at cell danger response, looking at metabolomics, looking at polyvagal, if we kind of overlap it and sort of try to speculate on the therapeutic session that, sessions that we had.
That what you went through, yeah.
Yeah, it's just kind of, I'd love your views. Like, what do you guys think actually happened there?
So I'm thinking that we've got 2 layers that we can look at your sessions and the process through this physiology that we're looking at. One is what was actually happening in the present with your foot itself and how the cells in your foot were doing in terms of the surgery and the problems and then the repair. And then the second layer that we can look at is how did it feed into the history that you had around surgery in the past. So, and again, it's like we're speculating, as you said, we couldn't really look inside your foot and see what ATP was doing and where you were exactly at. But if we kind of make a sort of a guess at that, I would say that you would have been, in that first stage, your CDR1, where there's inflammation. So there was an actual threat, a nerve that was tethered, stitches that were too tight, and so your body wouldn't be able to heal as the doctors had predicted that you would have been able to heal. This shouldn't have been a difficult surgery. You should have been up and walking in 2 weeks kind of thing. That wasn't happening because there was a physical threat in your foot. And so inflammation would have persisted and it would have been stuck, I guess, at that stage, maybe a little bit into CDR2, but you wouldn't have been able to move past that and get back to healing. Does that fit for you, Sam, with what you would understand of?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And it was in that stress state, which you would have been, we know that you were in that emotionally stressed state when there's something wrong and you were the self-advocacy that was happening, that you were having to really, push for yourself. Cortisol levels are high, and so the body was just not feeling safe at all, right?
Yeah.
Because of all the molecules that were circulating around there.
Definitely. And I think the challenge as well, and I see this clinically, and I'm sure you guys, also see this in your sort of work, is is when you have a situation in the present moment that feels like or triggers something from the past.
Yes, that's the second layer.
This experience here is so heightened, because it's like this is again, it's happening again. And
yes.
So the triggers are more acute. The experience is more acute. The danger threat response, I felt like it was the most pain I've ever been in. So it's sort of like it moves to another level. But also I think the opportunity for transformation at that moment is also really exciting, because when you have a trigger in the present moment that reminds you of something from the past, how brilliant to actually look at this and then look at this one and kind of do the simultaneous healing of this issue at the same time. And I think that's the kind of crucible when when therapy work and medicine and health and stuff all come together, and it's actually a symphony of everybody together, as opposed to silos of treatment, which is what we see today.
Yeah. So, I mean, I see how I think what happened from my point of view in those sessions was that we created safety at 2 levels. Like the first level was that actually having that beautiful image and metaphor that your body gave you of the frog tied up too tight and on the railway tracks meant that we could give the message to the frog, which was really your foot, that help is coming. And that created a sense of safety. And my imagining was that we actually softened the tissues of the foot, and around the nerve where the tightness would have been, we actually created some safety. And I had this idea that, your surgeons would come in and go, oh, wow, we can actually reach the nerve. We can release this. There's not sort of inflammation around it. So at that first level of the CDR, the safety might have actually created somewhat less inflammation in the system.
Yes.
But then I think at the second level, we really help to calm your nervous system and move you from that extreme heightened sympathetic state that you were in, like, I'm going to lose my foot. This surgery is just to try and save my foot. I'm never going to run again. Maybe I'll be able to walk, which triggered all of the experiences in your own body of the younger you and the surgery, which was designed to enable you to walk when you were only such a small child. So as you said, that just piled on top of itself, and you had that extra layer of panic was not just about the present, but about the past as well. And so by actually going in and doing the work that we did for the younger you and giving the safety and the voice to the younger you and the messages to that there's help and help is coming and all of those things kind of healed something from the past. So you were bringing in a completely different level of safety. I mean, the difference and the profound difference in you from the start of that session in a state of complete panic to the end of that second session where you were absolutely chilled and calm, and we could put you, we put you into basically that dorsal vagal low tone, which puts your body and your cells into a state where they can complete the cell danger response, and then healing can happen. And so after the surgery, when you've then taken away the actual foot issue in the moment, the nerve is now released. Hopefully what we did was we prepared the rest of your foot and all the cells in your foot. They were already in safety. And so healing could just start to begin straight away. And, you were able to walk much faster and put pressure on your foot much faster than they predicted, which I think is because both your foot was in safety and your emotional state was in safety.
Yeah. And I think the key about working at this level from a psychological perspective, this is not toxic positivity, let's do 17 affirmations a day, think positive, all this kind of baloney. It's not anything like that. It's not actually, I need to just con myself to think positive whilst I'm actually in the undercurrent losing myself completely. It's not about that, because this is nonsense, and it's actually, it doesn't heal and actually create safety at that very deep level. So when we work somatically, what is actually the difference here? Because that is at a way deeper level than just this kind of superficial level.
Absolutely.
Also, Sorry,
Yes, Sam.
Karen, I just wanted to thread in when you talked at our last session around Adele's experience, was that, you provided that missing experience as the child. And so I'm just sitting here thinking now that you had the missing experience as the child, where it was really scary when you were, casted up as a little baby, and for a significant amount of time, many, many months, right? And then you had this adult state of consciousness as well, which was kind of talking to each other. And then I was thinking, because you went into that surgery feeling surprisingly quite accepting of everything, right? That was the part that was quite phenomenal. And so I think in that therapy session as well, like, we haven't touched on it, and this is room for another seminar, but the endocannabinoid system in the brain and the pain receptors and what that does to GABA and dopamine pathways, like all of that, because I guess I just wanted to jump in there and say, like, what you did together was that everything was acknowledged as this whole system. Every part of what was fearful and scared was tended to, right? And I think that's the beauty about using mind therapies in conjunction with, all these other modalities that are available to us.
So what actually happens somatically, other than providing the missing experience, that is at that deeper level and not at this like rah, think positive level?
Well, when we talk about somatic therapy and Hakomi in particular as one example of that, as a bottom-up therapy, that we're working from the sensation level, we're working from the experience level, and that's what changes both our feelings and then our thoughts. Whereas that kind of toxic positivity that you're talking about, and other therapies that we would put in the category of top-down therapies, are where we try to change our thinking. I'm going to think differently. What's the evidence for this? I'm going to tell myself some different affirmations, or I'm going to challenge my thinking or something like that, in the hope that changes the feelings and then the sensations. It's a much more profound and powerful and long-lasting transformation. So what we're saying there is, by giving your little girl the experience of the nurse in the bubble, somebody really listening, somebody understanding, and then I think a parallel of me as your therapist in the current day giving you a similar experience of somebody listening, somebody understanding, someone tending to your nervous system, that's actually really healing, really changing how your nervous system actually kind of works. And we talk about neural pathways and memory consolidation, and what's actually happening, I believe, is that you're laying down a new pathway. You're actually laying down a pathway that says, I can be safe, I can be heard, I can be listened to, I can be taken seriously, I can be calm. And that's why it persists without you having to keep saying, calm down, go into this calmly. You didn't have to do that. You just went in calmly because your experience from the bottom up has been different. And that's what makes it really, really powerful from a therapy point of view. It's more lasting change, and also less effort to have to, it just shifts. You just changed. And you said there've been some long-lasting changes that have happened emotionally for you since those sessions and since the surgery as well.
I feel so different about that surgery that I had when I was 2. It's like a completely different experience. When I used to think about it, it was like a wall was there. Couldn't actually see past it. I'm now having really amazing dreams, and, sort of, some of them are funny, like funny things that happen, and, like little anecdotes, and, playing with my little Fisher-Price toy set. And, it's incredible how much my brain or whatever psyche has actually retained, even at such a young age. And the fact that I can experience that in my kind of late 40s, I'm like, yeah, it's pretty groovy. So I feel very different about it. And it's
so we
not
would say
difficult.
somatically that's integrated. That experience was not integrated, and it is now integrated. So you can now look at it. It's included in you. It's your experience of you. It's a part of you. It's not separate to you. And by actually going back in time in a way, I mean, that's the good thing. The nervous system, our psyche, doesn't really measure things by time. So if we visit your little girl now, it's as if we visited your little girl then. There's no timestamp on it. And so we actually do the repair that the missing experience that should have happened then can happen now. And then that experience gets integrated into yourself and you become more of your full self. You become more of you, which is really what we want to do in therapy.
And it's very exciting. Like if you think of anybody that is experiencing like trauma in the present moment, if it feels unbelievably heightened, that's a kind of doorway into a possible linkage from here to here. There might be something in your past that is also incomplete and it's being triggered. So trauma kind of lives like a little, you might have survived, survived this thing over here, but there's a tentacle from this moment into the present moment, and then you experience it as this trigger. So I had this huge trigger, which was pain. And it was a pain that reminded me of my previous pain. And I didn't know the link because there was this wall. And then the next minute, like we're traveling there and getting into it. And it's very, very powerful as an access route to actually process something that perhaps I would not have prioritized.
Because I guess what you're saying there, Adele, is that because you were so young, it's implicit memory, isn't it?
Yes.
So you're able to kind of pathway or segue through to that implicit memory. And I guess what I mean by implicit memory is that it's the memory you have before you start remembering things like episodic memory that, from the age of about 3 or 4. So before that, we don't remember much, but we held it in the system. So it was a kind of that segue for you, which is really fascinating, which is why somatic work works so beautifully, doesn't it? Because memory is stored in the body, and that was, So
yeah, and as you say, Sam, implicit memory is really important. We can't actually access implicit memory voluntarily. It has to be triggered. And so I always say to my clients, you have to be triggered in order to heal. People don't walk in the office and say, oh, I'd like to work on, this implicit memory feeling from when I was 2 years old. You walk in and you say, this is what's going on in my present day. And so I think that our psyche is kind of kind to us. It gives us these experiences, the experiences we have in the present day. We can either just try to deal with them as they are now, but we won't get that far with them. What we need to do is look at what's being triggered, like what's the trigger now and what does it take us back to? And if we go somatically, we get into the somatics, into the body and how this experience right now is feeling, like the pain that you were feeling and I'm going to lose my foot was our doorway in. That's what's here in the present. And we go in through the body, we then go across to the previous times we felt that way. And that's how we access the implicit memory, how we access the child, how we access the states that need to be online in order for us to do the healing, to provide the missing experience, to provide the safety, and therefore to let us get out of the cell danger response.
That's a lovely description there, Karen. Thank you. And, just to kind of highlight individuals who might be going, what's wrong with me? Why am I triggered this way? And thinking that there's actually something wrong with them. You just can't recommend
not at all
therapy enough, because it is that bridge to what you cognitively know, but what's in your system, but you don't remember.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, really.
And for me, the cell danger response information, when I learned about that, it was such an incredible aha experience. I'd always felt that there was a connection between the physical health and the psychological health. I've always been treating a lot of people who have chronic disease like Lyme's and mold disease and chronic fatigue and things like that. And I must admit, sometimes I think their doctors would refer them to me and I think, why don't you get better from the Lyme's first and then let's work on your trauma? You poor thing, like you've got so much going on already. Do you really want to dive into your childhood trauma? And yet we did it and it seemed to help. And so they would start to get better physically as well. And I'd be like, gee, this is interesting. I don't really understand. Anyway, we'll just keep doing it. It seems to be working. And when I understood about the cell danger response, it was just a complete light bulb of like, well, that's why you actually can't get better from the physical because you're stuck in the cell danger response. And until we actually work on the trauma, move through that and create the sense of safety, as you said, Adele, it has to be both a physical sense of safety and an emotional sense of safety. And when I see clients who are actually moving through their trauma and starting to feel safe in their bodies, safe in the world, their physical symptoms, their stomach is no longer so sore, or they're not so tired, or things start to improve, or their medicine starts to work, or their supplements are more effective, or all sorts of things. So it's just an incredible, message around how, the physical and psychological are so joined, and how safety is just really, 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 really crucial.
Well said.
A great
Perfect way to kind of end the episode. So yeah, well said. So thank you very much, Karen, for joining us. I'm sure you will join us again in the future. Fascinating discussions that we have. So next time we will continue musing all things health, relationships, and trauma. Till next time.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you.
The information shared on the Naked Insights podcast is for educational and information purposes only, and is not intended as a substitute for professional therapy or counseling. While we aim to provide helpful and accurate insights, individual experiences may vary. If you're experiencing trauma, mental health issues, or distress, please seek guidance from a qualified professional. The views expressed by us as the hosts are our own and do not necessarily reflect the opinions or positions of any affiliated organizations.